So we saw that the results of the testing of the chatbot were successful. Um, there are interesting recommendations to improve it before actually implementing it for the public, and that many of the features that were proposed in the chatbot were perceived for the user that tested the chatbot as useful and correct. So this will mean that the final design of the chatbot may be in line of what we developed so far with the improvements and recommendations that we outlined previously. Now, let us go inside the high-level design and architecture proposed for the chatbot that should be implemented in Kenya Revenue Authority. As we saw before, we think that the main chatbot functionalities should be these four. First, to be able to understand and respond to frequently asked questions. Second, to be able to understand and help user conduct assisted tasks. Third, there should be a functionality to allow person-to-person escalation, meaning if some person does not want to talk to the chatbot, or maybe the chatbot doesn't have the answer, the user can escalate to an agent. And finally, there should be user handling for login and logout purposes. There should be an extensive login process, so everything that is going on in the chatbot should be logged and for later review and processing. And there should be also reportings that will allow to overview how the chatbot is behaving. So let's dive a little more inside each of these main functionalities uh, in a architecture and design point of view. First, frequently asked questions, basic process flow. In this diagram, we can see how it should be processed a frequently asked question. First, the user types or speaks some text. This will go through the chatbot interface that may be web or voice related. Then in the chatbot core components, this question or this text should be analyzed, and they should be analyzed who is asking the question, if this question is public or private, so it can determine or select the proper routing. Where does this flow continue? The third step is to process the user input and identify the intent and the entities. In this case, this should be done with the assist of virtual assistant or conversational cloud services that normally are provided in the cloud by large corporations like Google, Microsoft, IBM, who developed its own versions of these services and that are now available with relatively low cost. So all the companies or organizations that want to engage in this type of processing, in this type of service, can be able to access it. The fourth step is that these services will conduct a natural language processing and identify the intents and the entities. With this information and the properly analysis, they will conduct a lookup for a response in the knowledge database. This will mean that in the database that should be configured, you can search for what the natural language processing identify of intents, concepts, categories that were identified from what the user asked. And then with that information and with the database and information, we can construct the appropriate response. Why we say that construct the appropriate response? Because maybe it should be text or maybe it should be voice related response. And then the last step is to display or say the response to the user. This is the flow of the frequently asked questions processing. Now for the task assistant processing flow, it has some difference to the previous flow. In this case, the user selects a task assistant. Then the chatbot identifies the assistant task and which parameters the task needs to properly conduct the task. And then the chat will start to ask the user for parameters and validate the input of these parameters. Then with all the information collected from the user, it will connect itself with the backend system using the API, that will mean the application program interface, and get information from the backend systems, the iTags or the custom systems, and this system will provide the proper response. So this step will be fulfilling the API interface with information with the backend system. Last, construct the appropriate response and provide the final answer or response to the user. The next big component should be a person-to-person escalation basic flow. So when the user wants to escalate this to an agent, his conversation to an agent or a real person agent, he will do so and ask to talk to an agent through the chatbot interface. The system will connect to the backend system, so the CRM software, and verify if an agent is available, and the schedules where the agent is available or not, or if it's over, has how much time will pass until an agent will engage into the conversation. So if this is available, the chatbot will send a notification to the CRM software and put the conversation on hold until an agent from the CRM software engage into the conversation, and then we'll continue with the conversation. One important thing we say is that the agent that is engaging in the middle of the conversation should be able to review everything or all the interaction that have the user with the chatbot, so it can get a proper context of what was the conversation. Another important part of the process will be user handling, logging, and report flow. In this case, in this diagram, we see that the user logs in. This component should validate or create a new user for statistic purposes, or also if it's required for credential validation. It also should log all the user and chatbot interaction. Everything the user says and the chatbot response and the bot responses should be logged. Also, when the interaction between the chatbot and the virtual assistant or conversational cloud service happens, if this service identifies the question properly or not, it fails to recognize the intent, this also produces information that should be logged. With the information from the user and the information of what the success or the failure of the recognition, everything should be logged so we can prepare later reports and help the user to identify where the chatbot is failing or where can it be improved. Finally, everything should be logged and updated in a chatbot database. And how do these components interact with themselves? Here we can see architectural diagram from all the components, where we can see here the users will have many interfaces for connecting to the chatbot, like a web page, like voice interaction, or maybe through social services like Facebook, Twitter, or other type of social media, that all them will connect to the same core component of the chatbot. The first component this interaction will have is with the user and entry handler. So we'll identify if the user has previously logged in, what type of user it is, and to handle the information that is getting in, even, for example, if it's a voice message should be correctly converted to text. And if it's a text message, well, be properly handled. Then this will go to the user intent processing that, as we explained it before, it uses the virtual assistant conversational cloud services. And it will identify if it's an assistant task or if it's a frequently asked question, so we can organize it by topic and category manager. And depending on that, on which direction it goes, it will process the adequate answer. In this process, it will use information from the chatbot database and information from the knowledge database. This also, there should be a chatbot management component that will allow to get all the information and especially the historic data to provide reports and key performance indicators for the chatbot team. All these components interact with the KRA current systems like the CRM when the user wants to escalate, or with the iTags or customs systems when the user asks for information that is private and is related for a specific information from a taxpayer. So this will be the high-level view of the interaction of all the components for the chatbot for KRA.